Hello and welcome to Season of War. Today, me and Carl are going to be talking to you about all things Summer Slaughter. Not all things Summer Slaughter, but Carl's run at Summer Slaughter specifically. Carl, how's your day? How's your week been?
That's good. I had to just quickly go back to work after summer slaughter, so I'm a little bit tired. So I'll have a little bit of coffee here, and then we'll get it going.
Yes, nice. Well, yeah, a couple late nights out in Pennsylvania for us after our road trip. Um, that's a surprise. Lots of friends, so kind of not partying too hard, but you and you and Ridge were having a good time. I was the
Yeah,
designated driver. I was also having a great time still though. A
yeah.
mildly more responsible time.
I was responsible.
You were.
I
You were.
mean, there are some people who were not rich.
That's I
Kidding.
mean, to be expected. But just as a quick introduction, if you haven't seen the last video, so Summer Slaughter was a 102 player GT out in Pennsylvania that we road trip down to Carl Ridge and myself to take some armies and go play some good games, and that we did. What else? Talking about this event, big things story wise is wins first, obviously as the most important stat. Tiebreakers were grand strategies and then battle tactics, which again weren't my favorite in this. I don't know how you felt about them, but just with the polarizing nature of a lot of tactics and strats right now, the different haves and have nots. I don't know, not my favorite. Um, but I guess any brief points to start off with, talking about the event, and then we'll jump into your list.
Yeah. So you know, the event was great. It was at St. Gabe's Lodge, which had unlimited beers. Um,
That was fantastic.
uh, yeah, that was fantastic. At any point, just grab a beer. But in terms of the pack, like you were saying, the grand strategies with this edition, yeah, there's some armies who have it very good, and then some armies who have to take the ones in the book, and those aren't nearly as easy. And so they have a much tougher time. So I had a little bit of the middle road where mine wasn't that easy to complete, but it was definitely doable without your opponent's interaction. So I'll kind of talk about that later on.
Hard for them to
Um,
deny it.
correct. It did make a huge difference in my game for, and I'll talk about that once we get there.
Cool, sounds
But
good.
yeah,
Do you want to jump in first then and tell us about your list or take us through it?
sure. So I was taking KO. As most of you know, I've been playing KO for quite some time. I was experimenting at the end of the last edition into this edition. Once the battle tactics came out, I was basically looking at them and saying that a KO can do maybe four of these fairly easily without any interaction with your opponent. And then plus the white dwarf battle tactics that you got meant that they combo so well. It was basically like you're able to do on garrison 3 units, get them into your opponent's territory. Next turn you can do um, get those 3 units back in your boat, and then the next turn after that you can do desecrate lands, and then the next turn after that you can do barge. So those four battle tactics are fairly like auto complete for you. Now it sounds like it was very easy to do that and um, do that in kind of that sequence, but that meant that you had to be in your opponent's zone for 4 turns, and I had to shuffle around that battle tactic. So it wasn't as easy as kind of my theoretical was, but kind of made it out to be. But it did mean I did have some options where some other people did not, because two or three of the battle tactics would combo together and then allow me to get ahead and score and the like. So going through my list, I know some people have been talking about Arcane Tome and Purple Sun in the
Yeah.
chat. I will address that. I will address that. So my warlord was Aether Chemist with Spell in the Bottle and Collector, which allowed me to have three total artifacts. So the Aether Chemist had Spell in the Bottle. The Navigator had the um, required artifact for Zilfin, which is the sub faction that I took, which is +1 to hit on the Navigator. And the Admiral had Arcane Tome with Flaming Weapon. I had 3 tens of Arcanauts that were Expert Conquerors. I would not take them in anything else, like Expert Conquerors, like 1v games. I would have 1 or 2 Arcanauts left when people tried to plink them off. And 6 models meant that I was
Yep.
holding objectives over monsters. Like I would take them in Expert Conquerors. I know conventional wisdom says get your KO lists as drop as low as possible. I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum. I don't care whether I'm 14 drops or whatever. I was 10 drops in the end. I had a 10 unit of thunders with all rifles, and that's because I wanted the 18 inches. I know the special weapons do much more damage and output much more. But I wanted the range instead. I had a gun hauler to zip around, take objectives when people left them um, unattended. I had an ironclad, of course, and I armed it with a battle ram, which does mortal wounds when you charge. And that was a product of playing games, namely against Jordan, which was like the only test game I had where I couldn't punch through armor whatsoever. So I wanted the option of perhaps charging something and doing mortal wounds. And then, of course, I had the Kron Spine Incarnate of Gur, which was bonded to my Admiral. And as everybody in chat was talking about, the purple son of Shaiish,
Yep.
um, which is very, very good now. It just has the ability to just knock big models out, even small models, medium models, doesn't matter. And then the -1 save is namely what I'm taking it. If it didn't have the auto kill feature, I'd still take the Purple Sun just because KO, you're trying to get red through and shots through. You're not
Yeah.
doing mortals. So,
Yeah, it's huge with KO traditionally is all rend one, right? So
yeah.
mostly rend one, so that's huge.
Yeah, and to address the big elephant in the room with how everybody in the internet is kind of discussing.
Hopefully we will be back soon. As of yet, I'm not sure.
Yeah, we're back
We're
because
back.
because I just so I was talking about the big elephant in the room. I'll kind of shorten it because I was rambling while
Yeah. Yeah, sorry about that,
but
guys, but thanks for your
yeah,
patience sticking around.
yeah. So uh, can I even say the word Nurple bun? Because that's I guess how I got cut off. So um I just kind of wanted to talk I just wanted to talk about casting the Nurple bun through the spell in the bottle. Um
Specifically not casting it.
it's specifically not casting it correct. So when you cast the Nurple bun through the spell in the bottle, um it is wild. There's don't let anybody believe anything different. It is wild, even when you're taking the Arcane Tome, like I have with the Admiral. Some people are trying to separate 2 different sentences in the core rules for control. No, those 2 sentences are tied together, and so that the uh, the person who casts the endless spell controls the endless spell, and that's the only time that you can control endless spells. And the Kharadron Overlords FAQ specifically says that spells cast from spell in the bottle is wild.
Yeah,
Full stop.
not technically cast.
Yeah, so what that means for predatory endless spells like Nurple Button is that when you cast it with the spell in the bottle, if it's your turn, obviously you cast it on your turn. You can move it, and then whoever's turn it is afterwards gets to move it. So if you're going first and you cast, the bun this, through the spell, like through the spell in the bottle, then you know that your opponent's going to be controlling it when they go. If you're going second and you cast it, then on a double you're going to get to move it again.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of a gambling element because of it, because it affects obviously your own units as well. But because of the Zilfin move, deploying it, you're usually deploying it deep in your opponent's lines, and then you can back off from it. So you can you can uh, you can definitely play a little bit of games with your opponent, and it messes up with your opponent's deployment significantly. Like people were trying to stretch their lines, you know, fill the whole back end so that the purple sun couldn't. Oh no,
Hit
stream's still
multiple.
good.
Yep.
Yeah, it couldn't land like in like a squishier target, but like when you do that, then you're more condensed, and so I could shoot you better. So it was just playing havoc in my opponent's minds. So it's very very good.
Having the arcane tome though, uh, well, it does for multiple benefits, but even specifically with the purple sun, if it gets unbound, it gives you the chance to recast it later.
Yeah, which ended up being big in one of my games.
Nice.
Massive. Usually I just put Mystic Shield. So kind of the premise of the list is since I'm a 10 drop, I'm not gonna be choosing turn most of the time. And so what I ended up doing was designing a list that has a game plan turn one and could potentially weather a double turn. So I usually just put Mystic Shield on the Ironclad, so it's a 2-up save, and then with all out defense, it's a 1-up save. If it's near the gun hauler, it has a 6-up ward. It has massive amounts of guns when you go into it, and I can usually deploy the thunders out as a frontline screen where it's 20 wounds that you have to chew through to get to the ironclad. So it'll take you about 2 turns, and most armies can't take off the ironclad in 1 turn
Yeah.
on a +1 save. So
Yep.
um,
Makes it tough.
yep, nobody wants to get doubled by KO, so I know they're gonna give me first.
Sense. Yeah, the shooty dwarves are scary.
Mhm.
Why don't we just jump into the games then, Carl?
Yeah, for sure.
So round one.
Yeah, I played one of our premium members, Mr. Nick Revenant, who was playing Sylvaneth.
Nice.
Um,
Man after my own
big,
heart.
big, um, key things in this list that I kind of saw and were very scared about. One is the Warsong Revenant with a Spell Slinger. You're able to just bomb, and then since my army's so closely packed together, the Tree Lord Ancient and Warsong Revenant bomb combo is something that is very very scary. Um, he also had a pack of 9 Karnoth Hunters with size. Now, with my experience, well, with my one game experience against Jordan, where I played as Sylvaneth, I can't punch through Kurnoth Hunters.
Yeah.
Um,
Specifically when they're like in trees or in
yeah, and
cover.
cover with the hive on top of it. So
Yeah.
my rend is they mitigate the purple sun, and then they're in cover and they get +1. A lot of save stacking like previous previous Sylvaneth books. And we're playing on Silk Steel Nests, which is the 8 objective one, and you're able to burn objectives, and it does mortal wounds around it if it's
Mhm.
equal to or greater than your bravery. So the key to playing KO, especially in this new edition, is identifying what are the key threats to your army and your opponent, seeing if you're able to take that threat out without taking too much um,
Risk.
risk from yourself. Correct. So with Nick's list, it was the Warsong Revenant that it was the most uh, damage to my list. The 9 Kurnoth Hunters with size, yes, they're gonna kill one thing a turn, and then they're gonna teleport around the board. But they're one unit A and B. I can't even deal with it, even if I tried. I would throw so much effort into them and never get through them.
Yeah.
So why waste those shots when you can pick apart the rest of the list? And I got lucky with battle plan as well. With it being 8, meant I could dance around and get onto points where those 9 Kurnoth hunters couldn't get me. And he was also a 1 drop, and so he had choice. Now, how I went on this whole spiel about people don't want to get doubled by KO. Nick actually ended up going first because he made a deployment mistake, and um, I was able to get to his Warsong Revenant if he gave me turn one. And so he had to take first turn, and he decided to alpha me as hard as he could. Now, I screened very well. He put the 9 Kurnoth Hunters with size and the Tree Lord Ancient into the bulk of my army, killing all my screens. Cast Ravenex Gnashing Jaws and like all this massive things. But it did mean that I could threaten him with a double, with the Ironclad and the Incarnate. I got lucky. I just shot the Warsong Revenant at 24 inches with kind of you know the half the strength of the Ironclad. Yeah, he had 2 units of 5 Revenants as well, David. I shot the Warsong Revenant. I put 9 wounds through. He rolled 0 wards, and so turn 1, the Warsong Revenant was dead.
Just wow.
And I just stood there, and I'm like, well, I
That
guess
helps.
I guess now I don't have to double turn you to kill your Warsong Revenant, which was my original plan, because I knew with a 4-up ward I would need 14 damage. She screened very well with the Tree Revenants and the Dryads. The Admiral, for those of you that don't know, has one of 3 modes that I get to choose after um, turn who's determined who goes first. So I took the one that's 2+ no ward within 12 inches of the Admiral, and that's once per game, just so that I can, you know,
Turn off a big ward save.
yeah, turn off the Revenant's ward save, and he would just go down like nothing basically with
Yeah.
the amount of rend I have. And so with that, I was kind of in a good position. If I doubled him, I would, press my advantage. But Nick did win the turn. I had shoved my Incarnate into the 9 Cardinals. The Tree Lord Ancient was dead at that point. And yeah, he basically had to deal with both the Incarnate and the Ironclad, and had put them in 2 separate corners of the map. And because I knew that the 9 Cardinal Hunters could only deal with 1 threat at a time, and the Incarnate, which had killed the Tree Lord Ancient, had leveled up to level 3, meant he couldn't even deal with that threat at that point.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, so I was just on opposite ends, and then he would try to deal with 1 threat, and then I would just switch, which is massive, um, the massive advantage of KO has, kind of in this battle plan, most definitely, but in most battle plans. And then the gun hauler was skipping from one objective to the next on his end and just burning them, taking D3 damage, but he's 10 wounds, so you're just
Yeah.
doing that basically. And so I came out with a big victory, like we said at the top of this breakdown. Grand strat and battle tactics were the first and the second tiebreaker, and I end up getting all of it in this particular matchup.
Nice.
Yeah, so I felt good. Sylvaneth is one of the armies that KO struggles because, again, like we were saying, the save stacking. If he had perhaps 2 units of Kurnots instead of the one big one, I would be in more trouble, because then he could potentially lock me down by denying 2 areas of the
Yeah.
board instead of just one. And I knew the Tree Revenants were going to be key, so I kind of just pew pew, the Tree Revenants from far away, just so that he wouldn't be able to teleport and take my objectives
Yep.
as well. So
Smart. Reduce their mobility and storing.
correct, because that's KO's main weakness, not mobility but scoring, because you have to be 9 away from your
Yeah.
opponent. Means that you can control where KO drops. Um, And if somebody has teleports as well, you don't have a plethora. Oh, that's a big word. A plethora of units to just spread out and prevent someone from dropping in. So you have to limit your opponent's scoring and take out their threats, and then you're in a good driving position. Just kill everything,
Yeah. Easy.
basically.
Easy. Well, it's so big round 1 win against an army that, again, like you said, you're kind of worried about. Um, we had that one practice game, which I think was eye opening for both of us, but able to
Yeah, I think that
take
was
it there.
key. Yeah, that was key in me playing that game, because I knew exactly what the threats were. I knew what the Tree Lord Ancient and Warsong Revenant combo was.
Yeah.
And I would
And
be very, very surprised and thrown off if that was the first time I was seeing it.
also, and this is where, just to highlight why obviously reps and experience is so helpful, it also lets you know you couldn't deal with the Kurnoth, where it had had not for that practice game, you might have tried to like go for them on a double or
Yeah.
something, right? And then
Didn't I shoot my whole army into 3 Kurnos in cover and it dealt 2 damage or something?
yeah, one or two, like
Yeah,
that
1 or 2 damage. I was like, forget it. I'm not
yeah.
gonna deal. I did make a slight gamemanship error, I will say, in this in the first game, where it's first game, you're slightly tired, that sort of thing. I let slip to Nick that I basically said I couldn't deal with the Kurnoth Hunters,
So
and you should never tell your opponent what your army can or cannot deal with, or what
he
your game plan
knew
was.
that you were going to be
Exactly, exactly.
trying to avoid
Um,
them.
yeah, and then he said he made a deployment mistake after we had deployed, so I knew I was gearing up for his alpha strike. So try to give as as little information to your
Yeah.
opponent as possible. Yeah, he was just swinging the 9 Kurnos like a big wrecking ball because he knew I couldn't deal with it because I said because I said
It's
I couldn't deal with it.
it's the Darren Watson pro tip. Don't give
Yep,
anything away.
yep. Even if you
Nice.
messed up, just pretend like you're the master of disaster and you've just done something crazy.
Well, round two then was some dwarf on dwarf action.
Yeah, so I played on a Silver Sheep who was playing a Cities of Sigmar Tempest Eye list. Basically taking a whole bunch of good dwarf stuff. So 20 hammers who do quite a bit of mortal wounds when they get in. 20 iron drakes, which have the most output of any shooting unit, if they get in. Because they're 16-inch range. 10 Thunders, exactly like mine. 10 Hearthguard Berserkers for the melee threat with broad axes and an Ironclad. All in Tempest Die, so the Rune Lord gives you +1 to wound for all of the shooting elements in the thing. Um, but one thing that was a big omission uh, in in her list is Sabeti.
Sweet. Thanks for the super chat. I super appreciate it. You guys are facing off tomorrow,
Yeah,
eventually. But
potentially. Yeah, he's playing his Lumineth. The one thing that's absent about on his list is a Soul Scream Bridge. Um, she's 1990 points, so she wasn't able to fit Soul Scream Bridge. But that meant that I could measure out all the ranges of her guns and stay outside of them. With the Iron Drakes, they move 16-inch shooting, 20 with the main gun, and then +3 on the first turn meant that if I was outside of 23 inches, then she couldn't shoot it with the Iron
mm,
Drakes. The Ironclad and the Thunders, I knew could fly high and drop anywhere, exactly like my army. And um, like I just had to accept that output, but that meant that if she had done that, then I could return fire with the majority of my army. So it would be quite a bit of threat. So I was thinking that she might play the same way I do and play at that 24-inch line, which meant that probably she couldn't do 8 wounds to my ironclad and prevent it from flying high. That is something I want to let everybody know. If you do 8 wounds to the Ironclad because it heals 1 at the start of the hero phase, it prevents it from flying high. So that's kind of the key bracket that you want to hit it at. Or obviously destroy it. But if you
yeah.
can't destroy it, hit that 8, and then you don't have that threat of just a boat just dropping anywhere. But obviously, I try to protect it as best as I can. So she deployed very, very far out, decided to give me first. I just ended up shooting the screens, both the long beards and the hammers, from range, while still staying outside of the ranges that I had measured previously. Um, killed very, very minimal, but scored big. And on his turn, I she did what I thought she would do, which is drop the ironclad towards my ironclad, who had Mystic Shield at that point, and dealt like 2 or 3 wounds. And so it was a big priority roll with 2 shooting lists. I ended up winning the priority roll. I deployed the Purple Sun at that point, so her Ironclad was -1 to save, and I just shot everything into
Nice.
it,
Yeah.
which ended up killing it. My Incarnate got into the 20 Iron Drakes, which unleash Hell, which meant that it would, go down 1 bracket, but it goes down 1 bracket at the end of the turn. So I mucked up the Iron Drakes as well, and that from that point on, I basically was able to dance around. Um, We were
It's
playing not as
crippling
fast.
blow.
Yeah, so it was 4 objectives, and with 10 Hearthguard Berserkers, 10 Longbeards, your Rune Lord, and your Auric Rune Sun, uh, it just meant that I could avoid them for the rest of the game while scoring, and then chasing the the hammer elements with my incarnate, because I'm not scared if it goes into something that could potentially kill it, because then I'm just reducing you even more. Um, so yeah, she's a newer player to AOS. Plays 40k previously. Very very good fundamentals, and I just gave her a few tips. Soul Scream Bridge is the one big thing that
It's
if
really
she
helpful.
had that on her list, meant that I couldn't do what I could do. The ranges extend by 24. So when you're threatening your opponent 41 inches, means that they have to actually like get into you and
Commit.
try their best. Yeah, and then the melee elements can crash in once your opponent has done that.
Nice.
So yeah,
Well, got all
grand
your
strat
battle
in five
tactics.
attacks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Nice.
did. Yeah, so feeling good. I was like, okay, we're doing very very good, and this is the part of the tournament where I probably was maybe a little bit too confident, because then the free beers kind of started flowing, and I had maybe mine and Anna's game was done fairly quickly.
Yeah.
And so I think I had 3.5 hours between rounds, because they had 45-minute breaks between each game. And so yeah, I just let the beer flow, and I was kind of inebriated for my game three.
Nice. Well,
And so Barl was out. Was Carl was not playing? It was Barl for round three.
well, thankfully, round three was an army you're pretty familiar with.
Hmm.
So you were facing off against Skaven.
Yeah, I was playing Matt Obringer with his Skaven. So Skaven is a very very strange battle tome, in that there are so many different builds and so many things that are good, that when you hear that you're playing Skaven, you have to really break it down as to what the elements are that are good in a in the list. And for Matt's list, it's the Vermin Lord Warbringer, Thankful on Bone Ripper, and the third threat I would actually say is the 10 Plague Sensor Bearers, not the 4 Rat Ogres. Those things hit hard. They're 4 attacks apiece when they charge, -1, 2 damage. So that's 40 attacks at 2 damage. Of course, he had Purple Sun. He had Lakon, the Soul Seeker, who paired with Thankful
Yeah.
means that he can just
Staple.
barbecue a unit.
Yep.
Like, just uh, it's devastating against things that have 1 or 2 wounds, because he's gonna mostly kill those things.
Yep.
Um,
It's worth noting just with this list, because this was just FAQ the other day, that a big play in this with the what is it? The Master Molder whips the Rat Ogres to give them +3 run and charge. The big thing with this previously is based on rules as written. You could then charge with that unit first, and then whatever the Rat Ogre's charge is. So let's say they roll a 6, then get +3, so 9. You could use that 9 for all the rest of your units.
yeah,
But they've now confirmed it is
unmodified.
unmodified charge rolls, so no longer able to use kind of the +3 to give your whole army +3 to charge, which was really good.
Yeah, very very good. And so we're playing Prize of Galay, which is a very very short deployment, 11 inches, and you know it took us a little bit to deploy, because Matt, I could tell, was an experienced player. Kept measuring, kept measuring, kept measuring, and he like put his hands on his hips, and was like, I don't think I can get outside of your shooting ranges. I'm like, I don't think you can. And so after he had said that, we weren't finishing deploying yet. Uh, Key thing is we were both 10 drops, and he had one roll off, so I know he had choice.
Yeah.
Um, he's like, I think I have to go first. Um, and so he did go first. I had deployed quite deep in my zone. As far back as I can, because I can just fly high.
Yeah.
Um, so Matt did the Skaven Alpha where he Laocoon Thankful. He had Skitter Leap the Gracier, tried to cast Purple Sun, um, did all these things. Didn't end up casting Purple Sun. Thankful was right on my lines. Um, and this was kind of the first mistake that Matt had is he moved Thankful so that Thankful was still wholly within 3 of Laocoon, so that on his turn he would be able to push Thankful all the way back 18 inches
On
backwards.
your turn.
It's on my turn, correct. Instead of just moving it fully forward, like on into my 10-man unit of Arcanauts. I redeployed. I got a 3, so that meant that only 2 of my Arcanaut company was within 8 inches of
It's
Thankful.
huge. Yeah.
I knew he wasn't going to be able to roast that full front unit. Use the warp grinder to deliver the sensor bearers. Then, like we said, this isn't impossible anymore. But he whipped the rat ogres, charged, rolled box cars.
Ooh.
So it was 12 plus 3, so it's
Whole
50
army's charging
inches.
15.
Yeah, I was like, the Vermin Lord Warbringer got into my left flank. I left maybe a 1.5 inch gap between my 10-man units of Arcanauts. He charged the 10 Plague Sensor Bears through that little gap, 15 inches, right into my Ironclad. Now he charged the Warp Grinder before the Sensor Bears, so I unleashed hell on those instead. But it meant that the 10 Plague Sensor Bears were right up against the Ironclad. Um, yeah, so I was in a very, very rough spot. Yeah. So Barl, finished deployment, and right after those 15-inch charges were made, I quickly just snapped back
Sobered
to
up.
reality. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was like, Matt, like, you're done your charges? He's like, yeah, I'm done. I'm like, I'm just gonna quickly go to the bathroom. So I ran to the bathroom, I like splashed water in my face. I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing, Carl? Don't throw it away. And I came back and I was like, okay, ready to play. Um Matt could have just ended the game right here if he had chosen the right sequence of fights. If he had chosen the plague sensor bears first, so there was only like 4 or 5 plague sensor bears touching the ironclad at this point. He had wanted more. He wanted all 10 to get in, and potentially just blow up the ironclad instead of just hurting it enough so it couldn't fly high. So he activated with Thankful first, trying to kill the 10-man screen that survived the shooting from Thankful. Um, just so that that screen was gone and he could pile in fully. And with a pile in twice, of course, from the 3 units of Master Clan,
Yeah.
he can get all those 10 guys in. Active with Thankful didn't kill the 10-man unit. The plague sensor bears were still kind of stuck. Now, this is another thing that a lot of people aren't familiar with. The people inside the boat can fight,
Oh,
and there's one guy in there that
I knew it was coming.
absolutely wrecks face, which is the Arcana Admiral. And so I all out attacked him and just bonked the plague sensor bears, and I ended up killing 6, I believe, 6 plague sensor bears just straight off the bat. So he had only 4 plague sensor bears get into the ironclad, did 5 damage, very, very respectable, but not enough to prevent me from flying high. Um, and so with that, I was like, okay, I have the chance for the double turn, and at that point, like I could perhaps close out the game. Um, Again, I chose the Admiral's no ward, so on my turn, I was able to just turn off the word on Thankful and just remove him off the board, do some serious damage on the Warbringer, and it came to priority, which Matt did win. So if I was to double, this is kind of the gamble that you play if you take first and try to alpha me, is that if I win the double, the game is over.
Off. Yeah.
Um, Matt did win the roll off. His Warbringer was stuck in combat with Arcanauts. The 4 rat ogres were stuck in combat with um, my my incarnate. There's no more plague sensor bears from his list, and so I knew the ironclad was going to be safe for a turn. It basically became a game of grinding with prize of the Gallet. You can you can play a longer game because the opponent can't run score immediately, and because I was taking second, I was choosing where the objectives would be. And so I was able to just grind slowly. The Warbringer died turn 2, and at that point, the Incarnate weren't wasn't in 3 turns wasn't able to kill 4 Rat Ogres for some reason, which was great because he can bring them back with Master Molder on a 3 plus.
True. Yep.
In turn 3 when I had 1 prio, I just, teleported my Ironclad further into his lines, killed the Master Molder so that
Can bring
when
them
I
out.
did ended up shooting the Rat Ogres that he couldn't bring them back. And so with that, I was just able to just slowly take the objectives one by one. And of course, clan rats can't stand up to
No.
the might of a ironclad.
No.
So, so yeah, with some key activations, if he just went with the 6 that were in 6 or so plague sensor bears that were in, then he could have potentially did enough damage where I couldn't fly high for a couple turns, and I can't pick and choose the targets that I want to kill.
Yep.
Um, that could have maybe swung the game uh, quite significantly, actually. But again, that's no longer um, an option because the +3 to charge, even with
Yeah.
boxcars, he was only able to get 6 in. So if you remove the +3, it would only be maybe
Yeah.
one guy in. But it's kind of like a sobering experience for myself. Close that gap between the two units. I had wanted to keep them slightly separate because I wanted a delineation between the 2 units, but I have free hand on the
Yeah.
shoulders to tell me which are the 2 units. But I was a little bit sloppy in deployment there, which meant that I gave Matt an opening
Yeah.
to,
Something that you don't think is going to be a big deal turned out to be a big deal, or
yeah,
potentially opened a gap.
yeah, open the gap. And so, I was out of day one with all my grand strategies and uh
Nice.
all my battle tactics. So I was very, um very, very excited. Now at the end of day one, they had put pairings up and then taken them down. I didn't look at them, so I had no idea who was playing day two, but some people did. So my opponent was slightly prepared for me, and I was not.
Well, you know the army though.
Yeah. But before we go with that, I just want to give a quick shout out to our Tough Crowd family who we stayed with like during the B&B, and spent time with them, and for T Sports and Rob for streaming the
Uh,
games and that sort of thing. They're kind of underappreciated, but they're a massive part of our tournament weekend. Um,
Lots of
wouldn't
friends
be as
there.
fun,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
wouldn't be
that's
as fun if we
100%.
we had all those people. So I went back, ate some meat, some charcuterie, some cheese, and I was filled up and ready to go for round four. Um,
Which
so
was a mirror match.
which was a mirror match. So this list, run by Joe Shoemaker, which is a KO list. It's, as you can tell, very similar, but there are key differences between our lists. The hero loadout's exactly the same. Arcane Tome on the Admiral Collector with Smell in the Bottle, 3 times 10 Arcanauts. Uh, he went with, instead of an Incarnate, 2 Gun Haulers with Drill Cannon, a frigate, 2 frigates, and the Ironclad. And he went with the Sun, of course, Spell in the Bottle, and then the Burning Head. And he went no sub faction so that he's able to get as low drops as possible. So he was 3 drops. He had a custom Skyport, which is still very, very good. Allows you to run, retreat, shoot, and charge. Gain extra gold, which is usually +1 to wound. So you have 2 turns of very good output from the Ironclad instead of one in my list. Um, and reroll hit rolls of 1 for anything that flies, which against KO is basically your greatest threats. Because he had low drop, I knew that he was going to give me first. He's a KO player. That's how we operate, and he's going to try to double me. And then on the double turn, he can potentially close out the game if he's able to knock out my Ironclad, um, and that sort of thing. We are playing on Presence of Idols, so there's only um, 3 objectives. So it was going to be a tough fight for those. I knew I had advantage on the objective control because of my um, expert conquerors on my Arcanauts. And he, most of those the vessels are only worth two models. So if he doesn't knock out the full Arcanaut units, then I'm going to be scoring those. So he screened very well. If because I have to drop outside of 9. The purple sun is 8 inches,
Yep.
so 1 inch away from your front screen, and then it moves 8 inches and affects 3. Means that I only have 10 inches behind your front screen to affect things with a spell in the bottle, and he was way deeper because he was in the corner like KO likes to deploy. So he knew I couldn't purple sun him turn 1, and that was the greatest threat to his ironclads and his boats. And so I just decided to just blink the scoring units. I just killed the 30 Arcanaut basically
Nice.
on my first turn, which meant he still had all his output concentrated, able to fly high. Oh, screen went mute.
Stream went mute. Oh, it was deleted. Message was deleted.
Yeah,
So,
message deleted.
yeah.
So I knew he was able to basically just shift his whole army into one side, output. He does the KO thing, quote unquote, better than I do because I have an incarnate. The incarnate can't, teleport and do
Yeah.
stuff. But it does mean that he has to stay outside a certain range of the incarnate because the incarnate will eat boats like for free. And so it was a very KG matchup turn 1, where he went for the incarnate instead of my ironclad and just de-leveled it, which is I think the correct thing to do. And then big priority roll for KO turn 2. Who wins that priority roll? And it was Mr. Shoemaker who won that priority roll, and he started rubbing his hands, and I was like, "Uh-oh, I am in
Yeah.
big trouble now."
Always, it's such a big thing for
Volatile.
yeah, for KO in general. It's huge. So when you have 2 KOs, it's even more volatile.
Yeah, so he ended up winning it, killing the incarnate, and just putting more damage onto other things. Basically, at this point, all I had. Oh, one of the big things. He came quite close to me, so I knew that the Aether Chemist could spell in the bottle Purple Sun into 2 or 3 boats, and I was like, yes, I'm in a good spot here. Joe made a big gamble. He shot the frigate, which has 1 shot, 3s, 2s, -2, d6 damage into my chemist, who's -1 to hit, +1 to save inside the garrison. So it was 4s, 2s, -2, d6 damage. Went through, rolled the 5 on the damage. My Aether Chemist just popped.
Oh
No
no.
spell in the bottle. Just the 1 shot. Just boop. Just gone. And I was
Yeah,
like, oh,
that's
God.
rough.
Okay, so I have an Admiral, a Navigator, 10 Arcanauts, and a Ironclad. That was all that was left after the turn 2 shooting. So, and he still had his whole army. Well, the Arcanauts were dead, but everything else, all the boats were alive. So I was in, quite a back foot. And basically, Joe is an experienced KO player, so I had kept casting Mystic. Well, I on the first turn I cast Mystic Shield on my Ironclad, which meant that it was in a good save, and because KO can't deal with it very well, he meant you just ignoring the Ironclad and just letting it, potentially do what it does, but removing the other elements of my army like you're supposed to with KO. And it was at this point that I made this decision. If I cast Mystic Shield on my Ironclad, yes, the Ironclad's going to survive and, potentially be able to do things. If I cast Mystic Shield and it went off, I could potentially get all 5 of my battle tactics, potentially, uh, get my Grand Strat, but lose the game. Because I just don't have enough output to kill those boats, and he's just going to outscore me. Or I try to cast the Purple Sun, and just throw. It could do
Kind of
something, could
a
not do nothing.
last
Uh,
ditch effort.
but I potentially won't get all 5 of my battle tactics. So do I gamble, cast the Purple Sun on an 8, or do I cast Mystic Shield on a 5 and potentially play a longer game? And you know me, Jordan. I went for the gamble. I went straight for the Purple Sun on my turn.
I think in that position, like you wouldn't normally do that, but I think in an even game, but because you were on the back foot,
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
you
I
either,
was on the back foot.
like you said, This is something if you on the Miscast podcast, Darren Owen talked about. It's like you could you could make the guarantee or the more reliable play, and you're to lose a close game, or take the risk and go for the win kind of thing. Some
Yep.
kind of
And that's just up to you. There's
simplification, but
no right choice. There's no right choice. You can like at this point of the tournament, I was already overperforming. I had wanted to go to the tournament and get a 3-2, and I was already at 3. So I could potentially go 4-1 and get everything and be
yeah.
very, very high and be on the top 5, and I would be over the moon if I was able to do that. Or do I go for the 5-0? Potentially.
So
So I went for the gamble. And
what
sorry, I
happened?
did I did before we get to this. Um I did also fail my grand strategy on my turn 1 because I was an idiot.
Oh
So
yes.
you have to spend the gold for every turn. Because I was swimming in CP, I in my mind had a plan of trying to reroll the charge with a small boat because I knew he was going to target that almost immediately and use the gold to reroll the charge and not make the charge, but spend the gold so that I didn't have to worry about it round 1. But because I had 3 CP plus the CP from heroic leadership, I ended up using the CP for heroic leadership to reroll the charge.
Just thinking you had so much extra.
Yeah, instead of the gold. And so I didn't spend a gold round 1, and so I already was 3 points down. And I was like, "What are you doing, Carl? Like, you just potentially cost yourself massive amounts of points too, with that being like the first tiebreaker." So with all that the other way, I was like, "Okay, it's let's go." Call, cast Purple Sun on 9. He was unable to unbind it. That was the other thing too. He had an unbind. So cast Purple Sun, went straight for the Ironclad, and what's their role when that Purple Sun arrives?
I don't know,
But a
Carl.
1. But a 1.
Oh,
And then the Ironclad disappeared. And I was like, all right, I'm in position. At this point, he had also cast his Purple Sun,
yep.
but his was from the spell in the bottle. And like we said at the top, um,
You get to move it
so
if it's your
I
turn.
get to move it. So I moved both Purple Suns. I was just I just shoved both Purple Suns into his main massive boats, and everything in there was -2 plus
Ooh,
my rend.
ooh, that
So
hurts.
yeah, and so that ended up happening. I believe I ended up winning priority again and moving the sun again, killing another frigate. So I was like, "Oh my lord! Like I'm in the driver's seat now. These two purple suns, like I can't lose with the ones I'm rolling." Which you never say. So Joe was very very you should never game plan for the purple sun going off.
You
That's
can't.
it's
No,
not
it's not reliable.
it's not a thing. But the purple sun, I'll kind of cut this a little bit short. The ironclad went down, the frigate went down, and round 5 he had a play to win, using his admiral going into the 2 arcanauts that were alive. And like I was saying, expert conquerors is what was my advantage in this matchup. 2 arcanauts were just in the central point versus his navigator and his admiral, and his admiral could was very very close to the arcanauts. He was going to move and then charge them, and the admiral does so much damage. He's going to kill 2 arcanauts, no
Yeah.
problem. But before he could move, what moves first? Purple Sun. Purple Sun just got into the 2 heroes and ended up killing the admiral.
How many
So
ones did you roll? 3 ones.
3 1s in like I think 4 turns.
All right.
Insaneness.
Yep. It's a ridge
Insaneness.
move.
Yeah. I was like, I just looked at him. I'm like, sometimes there's just I was telling people I had no business winning that game, but there's just some moments in games where everything just lines up on your end, and you feel like you can't lose, like at all. Like it was insane. That was the craziest sequence of events that
Sometimes
you
the
know.
dice take control of a game, and
Yeah,
they did it that one, and it was in your favor. So
yeah. And the thing was, I would pick up one die. I had like 40 dice. I would throw. It would be a 1. And then I threw it again, and it was a 1 again. And so I was like, okay, this die might be like broken. So I put it off to the side, and I grabbed another die and I rolled it, and it showed up as a 1 again. I'm like, okay, it's not just the dice. It's like something happening in this specific moment in time where I couldn't lose. And then the thing was, I was making my saves, so it was like, whew. Yeah, yeah. There's Joe in the chat.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, it's just insane. Yeah, like I was telling people throughout the tournament, I had no business winning that game, but again, it was just my day, and it just
You take it where you can get it, so you don't complain.
yeah. I did drop my grand strategy, so that did mean that I was down on the first tiebreaker. I could have secured that grand strategy, and I would be at full points. But again, it would change my last game matchup, and
Changes
there's
everything.
a lot of ifs, ands, and buts, and that sort of thing. So yeah, last round I was like, okay, I drop a grand strategy. I might have, there were 6 players going into round 5 who are 4-0 at that point. And I was like, I'm gonna get one of the weaker 4-0s, you know, not to say that Skaven's a little bit weaker, uh, with Jacob piloting it, or Slanesh was weaker with Anthony piloting it. But one of those
Sure.
two books isn't nearly as strong as Thunder Lizard Seraphon. The other one was Bill Souza with Fyreslayers. There's Sylvaneth again, and I didn't want to face that, like a
Yep.
4-0 Sylvaneth player. Um, there's still very, very good players, but I'm like, okay, I'm gonna be near the bottom end of things, so I'm gonna get a easier matchup. And who do I rock up against round 5? But Team America, Captain America himself,
Yep.
Bill Souza with his Fire Slayers Lofnir build. And now this specific match was streamed on the T Sports Network, so if you want to watch back some of the highlights of that or some of the coverage of that, you can do so on their channel. Round 5, yeah, Mr. Bill Souza. And so he was playing a Lofnir build, which featured 3 Auric Runestones on Magma Draw, 15 Hearthguard Berserkers, and the one thing I want to shout out in his list is the Rune Lord, which was highlighted. Um, he was anticipating there was going to be a lot of Purple Suns, and I think Bill was correct.
Yep.
Um, the Rune Lord has +2 to Unbind, but also +2 to Dispel. So that's a very, very strong ally choice for a dwarf army. Um, but going back to the very, very start of this recap, where we were saying that the grand strategy is a little bit polarizing. Bill's grand strategy was just to have a invocation present at the end of the game.
One of the
So
best
the
ones.
the flame spitter is cast on a 3, so he has to do that one of 5 turns, and he gets +1, I believe, from the pizza oven. So on a 2+, and if he never activates it to do damage, which he never did because he just wants to guarantee his grand strategy, it's just roll a 2 up. Okay, I have my grand strategy. like,
Yeah, it's annoying when
like
you're
I was
not
like,
when you're not an army that has like a really good one.
yeah, just 2 up.
Salty.
Yep, here it is. Like, now Bill was 8 drops, I was 10 drops, so I, with better, I don't want to say better players, but very, very experienced players, I knew that they are going to give KO first. So I deployed in such a way that I can get. We are playing close to the chest, so 6 objectives in that weird L-shaped deployment. Um, and knew he was going to give me first, so I deployed very, very aggressively in order to capture the points and put my incarnate fairly central because the magma drops don't want to tangle with that thing because there's 3 of them and he's going to level up. Now, Bill did something that was very, very smart. He put his magma drops 10 inches apart. So the longest part of the base of the purple sun at 105 millimeters is about 4 inches. It affects 3 inches on either end of the purple sun. So if you're more than 10 inches apart, the purple sun can only affect one magma drop. So
Yeah.
he wanted to lower the amount of opportunities for me to auto kill a magma trough, and so he just put his magma trough 10 inches apart. Now, that did mean that they weren't very centralized, and I could potentially just drop on one flank than the other,
Yeah.
and then shoot a magma trough and only have one of them come into me instead of 2. So the purple sun was doing its job in warping my opponent's deployment.
Yeah, that
But I
kind of
did
works
still,
into your plans.
yeah, for sure. I also called the no ward, 2 up no ward. So the Hearthguard Berserkers are effectively can't come into my Ironclad because the Admiral would just turn off their wards and I'll just wipe them. Hearthguard are 5-up save. Without the 4-up ward, they're not very, very tanky. And so I was feeling very, very good in the matchup going in, but I knew because of how skilled Bill was that I still had to play um, quite well to beat
Yep.
him, even
Can't
though
make
I had him
mistakes.
correct, because he's going to capitalize on it. The Magma Drops are 18 wounds apiece, which is crazy.
Yeah. Tough to chew
um,
through.
Yeah, and then they bleed mortals when you attack them in combat, and they do a bunch of things. And their 12-inch move, they can be 14-inch move with the rune, with +2 to charge, like very, very quick still, so they can catch me if I get into that danger close range. My turn one, I just deployed Purple Sun, trying to, roll a one. I was like feeling so good against Joe, just taking all these things out. I was like, maybe magic will happen again, and didn't end up happening. But it did meant that I had one turn where it was -1 to save. I carled it, left the Magma off on 1 wound,
Nice.
and
Classic.
then on Bill's turn he moved it out of the way, and on his double turn he moved it into the corner. He didn't fly off the board because then I had a potential to recast it with my Admiral. He just moved it to the corner. So
Yep.
um, basically the game was hinges and balances of 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 us circling. So Bill, with one of his Magmadroths, the very, very tanky Magmadroth who had a 3-up ward, was coming all along my right flank and just mopping up my Arcanauts. And for me, I was trying to mop up his left hand flank so that we were going to turn in a clockwise fashion. Um, but Bill had done it a little bit quicker than I had anticipated, and got into my alpha objective one turn earlier than I did. So Bill had a um 1 point advantage versus me. And at that point he basically just wanted to tie me and score. He didn't want to press his advantage and potentially, gamble, and then something crazy happens, and then, I take the initiative. So after he had taken the alpha objective, he kind of played a more conservative game. Um, One of the things is because I have so many units that can teleport, I can stretch them out, and so I was I was trying to claw points here and there, attempting to just you know to just tie it up at one point or the other, get his alpha objective and that sort of thing. But he pushed his Hearthguard Berserkers into me. I believe it's round 3 or round 4. No ward, shot them off. Meant that he had very, very little scoring elements at the end of
Yeah.
the game. At the very, very end, before we rolled for parity round 5, Bill and I looked at the state of the game, and if I had one priority, I would win by 2 points. If Bill had one priority round 5, he would win by 1 point. And that's just the nature of how the scores went.
Yep.
And because of him getting the alpha one turn ahead of me. And so we rolled priority. I won that priority roll.
Nice.
And here I am beating Bill Souza by 2 points instead of losing by 1 point.
Nice.
So it was an
Feels good.
incredibly close game.
Those prior
Uh,
rolls at the end to win it feels good. But
yeah, it was one of the closest games I've ever played. Um, it was one of the most intense games I played. But I kind of want to circle back to what something that happened right before the round started. I was walking to the stream table, and you just kind of just waved to me and said, "Just slow down."
oh yeah.
And that kind of helped me in that game. I'm not immune, like, for the folks out there, I'm not immune to celebrity, like,
Well,
shock.
it's yeah.
It's Bill Souza. He has a reputation. He's a very, very good player. This is the first time I'm playing it. I was part of Team Canada. In the previous year, he's the captain of Team America. Feels like a World's game
Yeah.
streamed on live. Like, it
And
kind of got to me a little
there's
bit.
there's there's always pressure, and especially this was your first shot out of 5-0. I
Yep.
believe so. Top table or top tables.
Yeah.
round 5 of a GT 4-0. There's going to be pressure for
There's
sure.
pressure. Yeah, definitely pressure.
I'm glad
Yeah.
I could. But it's funny. Yeah, knowing Carl, you'll often play games like finish games super early, and I know you can sometimes
Yeah, to my detriment.
to your
Yeah.
detriment. And you're the one who's even said this. Will play too quickly and not take enough time to like slow down and think things through. And I'm like, these
Yep.
were 3-hour rounds too, so I'm glad I had the chance to grab you. But it's funny that
Yeah.
I didn't think it would mean anything, but funny that it did.
Yeah,
Like,
no, I just kept, just the whole time, like, I believe T Sports Network is going to release the full game with player audio.
yeah,
You could hear me at some points in the turn, go like, slow down, slow down. I just kept talking to myself, and Bill kept looking at me like I was slightly crazy because my hair was all over the place. I was wearing swimming trunks and like a Spider-Man t-shirt, and I wasn't wearing shoes
yeah,
or socks at that point, so I looked insane. Um, yeah, I slowed down, took stock of each of my um, options. Any wrong decision here or there could have swung the game in his favor, but we were breaking down at the very end. One or two things he could have done as well could have swung it in my favor. So it was incredibly razor thin game. The MVP in that game was the Admiral.
yeah.
Just turning off the ward roll meant that he couldn't commit too early with his Hearthguard and then hold me up because I would just blast him off the table. Um, and so, you know, I had the advantage playing my hand. But Bill played incredibly well, and he took the alpha objective one turn earlier than I could, and that could have decided the game. So yeah, I was 5-0 at the end of it. I
Yeah.
was waiting for Anthony Trentinelli's game and Jacob's game to finish. And
See
at that
what
point,
final placings were.
yeah, at that point, I knew if he had dropped his grand strategy, I would win the tournament overall. If he got his grand strategy, I knew that Anthony was going to win, and Anthony ended up, I think, beating Jacob pretty badly with Slanesh, going 5-0 and getting everything. Now, if I didn't goof in round 4, things could have been different. We could
Yeah.
talk about all these
What ifs?
theoreticals and what ifs, but it's my very first 5-0 of Age of Sigmar. Period. I've had many opportunities going 4-0 and then being at top table and
Yeah.
and dropping that last game. And so it felt like a really nice weight off my shoulders to get that 5-0 and do it in such a big tournament too.
Yes. Yes. Very.
Um, so yeah, that's kind of my journey. It was kind of a
Nice.
crazy ride where got too drunk game 3, didn't have,
You lived
tops
the
game
tournament
5.
experience to the fullest.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's honestly just hanging out with friends and playing good games, playing close games, uh, and yeah, that's kind of the tournament experience. Like if I wasn't able to hang out with people and just play tournament games, it might not nearly be as fun. So if you're thinking of going to GT, just grab a friend. I know one of our tough crowd family friends, Teresa, was I think 1-4, but she had a great time. It was her very first GT, and that experience I think wouldn't be the same if she wasn't hanging out with everybody.
Yeah.
So
Great
yeah, just
community, great group makes it all worthwhile. And
yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, that's kind of all I'll say about 5-0. I'm
nice.
gonna keep hammering KO, see where I get to, potentially try to lock up number one spot in ITC for KO. KO's
The
my
goal.
favorite
That's
army
like your
aesthetically.
first army and your baby.
Yeah, I pre-ordered it when it was coming out. Like I've been there since day one for KO. I lost two frigates somewhere in the ether, fully painted. Like
How do you
I've
do
had
that?
a road. I've had a road with KO. Like it's just crazy. And so like I'm happy to get my first 5-0 with the army that I love the most, and I'm gonna keep continuing with them. Maybe take some detours because you know me, I can't stay
Yeah.
with one army for very long, but
Bounce
um,
around a little bit.
bounce around a little bit. But definitely for the larger tournaments, I think KO has a lot of gas. I will shout out my other KO buddy, my round four opponent Joe Shoemaker, who ended up fourth, even with a loss. He was the top 4-1. And so 2-4 for the two KO players
Good
is
results.
very good. There was only five of us in total out of 104. And so it was big results for KO. I don't want to say two different builds because they're fairly similar with the Purple Sun spell in the bottle, but two different ways. If you're looking to play KO, you can either go my way, go high drop, have a game plan for round for taking the top of one, or you can go Joe's way, which is going for second place or second turn, and then trying for the double to really, really put some pressure on your opponent. So there's kind of two ways you could play KO there. Kind of, and both are very, very successful. I mean, my Purple Sun just went off, so I got it above Joe. But I'm sure if that didn't happen, that he would have taken me,
Good to
and
either. Yeah.
would be playing Bill Souza instead. So
Yeah. So I have a question for you. Just looking at,
mm,
kind of in conclusion, talked about list building and whatnot.
mm,
Um, Having also run the incarnate in lists and done well with it, it can really fill the gap of weaknesses in armies. Look, this GT is a perfect example of KO in second, which traditionally hasn't been a super competitive army this edition, and
yeah,
Slaanesh in first, which has been far from a competitive army this edition, also doing
yeah.
well with the incarnate. Now, how important do you feel the incarnate was to your games, and do you feel like it is integral right now with KO, or kind of where, just in general, how do you feel on it?
Yeah, so a lot of people are taking the incarnate because they're looking at a big monster piece that can stomp around and do some damage. I'm not very impressed by the incarnate's combat abilities for 400 points. It's actually not that great. Whiffs more often than not.
Yeah,
So what it accomplishes in my specific army and why I take it is first you can't be killed in one turn, so it soaks quite a few damage, and the second is that enemies monsters, which are usually the things that threaten your army the most, um, are just denied space.
yeah,
So the incarnate moves 12 and then rerolls charges means you have to be very, very aware of where it can land, and when it levels up, you're in big trouble at that point. And so I use it as a piece to kind of chaperone. I don't know if this is the right word. Chaperone the rest of my army, where it just lurks in the edges. And when an opponent commits with a monster, I'll commit it at that point. I
yeah,
don't just throw it in my opponent's. Like if my opponent doesn't have a monster, then I'll just throw it in their army and then force them to deal with it, and then shoot in the background. Give me the two turns that it requires to kill the incarnate to just shoot. But I use it as more of a denial space against other people's monsters, and it's very, very deceptive with how fast it is, especially when it's wild.
yeah,
Like, don't make it wild because that thing could just run around and finish games off just by itself. And because of how strong KO is in shooting and is able to just pick apart opponents' hammer pieces. When your army is gone and the Carnate's still alive, you can just bully your opponent basically off of objectives and kill the weaker stuff. Or they deal with the Incarnate and the rest of your army is
is
still alive and
untouched.
just shooting. Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's one of two things that you have to deal with. There's very few armies that can deal with both at the same time.
yeah,
But the Incarnate has, I would say, gone down in power with the recent release of Sylvaneth and Skaven. They have so many tools from range with Skaven, and then with Strike and Fade from Sylvaneth, they're able to deal with it without any repercussions,
yeah,
basically. So it has become weaker in the meta, but it's just 400 points. It's not even that much. It's not like Techless is like 740 or
yeah,
Nagash is 900. It's not a massive investment. Like for 400 points, I get a small boat and a medium boat.
yeah. I think
And does that accomplish the same thing? I don't believe so.
no, it has. You're right. It doesn't do a lot in terms of like its damage isn't insane for 400 points. It has no real huge other abilities or anything. It's the turn mechanic, but yeah, it's
And you just have to
400 points well spent.
you just have to respect it too. Like against Bill, um he did 13 damage to the incarnate on one turn. And on average 3d6 is 10. So your 13 is like not way over, but
Yeah,
it's
but
over what you
should.
would. Yeah, and I rolled a 14. And he's like, well, I just wasted X number of attacks on an incarnate that just is free to go do other things.
Yep.
And then he did 15 damage to the incarnate, and then I rolled a 14 again, which meant a D level. But he's like, after
It's
that
that
very
close.
first, yeah, after that very first experience where he did 13 damage, Bill had to over allocate just to make sure, because I already showed him the possibility that he
Yeah,
could
yeah.
just ignore that
The risk.
13
Yeah, yeah.
damage. Yeah, so he put even more resources into try to kill the incarnate. And if he doesn't deal with the incarnate, the Magmatroths are in trouble. And so it just gives you all this space to maneuver with the boats.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's
Well,
actually not that accurate. It's threes
yeah,
and threes. I don't know if you've ever rolled threes and threes, Daniel.
yeah.
I would I
It's
would put I would put one or two through on the regular. I'm like,
yeah,
oh, okay, 8 attacks, one or two, okay.
yeah, yeah. It's gonna do some damage for sure, but yeah,
Yeah,
it's obviously the mechanic of not dying in one turn and also fighting until the end of the turn.
leveling up,
Yeah,
and the other thing I'll mention in kind of in closing with this meta is so many people are taking endless spells and taking like low casting value endless spells. Like cogs is very low. You can use that as a springboard. You can run like a non-wild incarnate deep into your opponent's lines, and if you're within 12, you can charge the cogs. But if you're able to be within half of another unit, you complete the charge, and so you use it as a springboard. You're able to run
yeah,
and charge. Or like in Nick's game, he cast the Ravanax Snatching Jaws, and threw it into my Arcanauts, and I just ate it, and I was able to level up right off the bat, then
yeah.
kill the Tree Lord Ancient, and then you know, um, so yeah, so with all of that running around and those endless spell builds starting to pop up, like the Incarnate does get a little bit stronger, but again, there's things that are direct counters to it, Sylvaneth and shooting elements that can take it down pretty quickly.
Nice. Well, yeah, cool. It's great to hear about your games and kind of from just hearing the little tidbits on the sides to actually doing into deep dive. But big 5-0 for KO. So congrats again, Carl. Super happy for you, obviously. Um, yeah, great job.
Yeah, it was definitely one I'll remember.
Nice. Cool. Well, I think then, unless there's anything else you want to add, we can wrap
And
things up.
yeah, it doesn't look like there's any more questions. Stonks up, yeah, stonks up. So
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Awesome. Well, with that, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone watching. Hope you enjoyed this little look into Carl's undefeated run at Summer Slaughter. But that's about it. We'll say goodbye and see everybody soon in another battle report.
Bye.
Goodbye. Oh gosh, now I have to turn off the stream. Where's the button? There we go. Goodbye.